is Tom Coleman.
Hi, thank you, Chris. My name is Tom Coleman. I'm the acting city manager for the city of Newark. We're here tonight to talk about the upcoming referendum for June 19th. So this is the 7th of 9 planned town hall meetings where we're going to discuss the referendum process and the projects that are included in it. Hopefully everybody had a chance to look at the boards. If not, we're going to go through each of the projects in a good amount of detail as we get a little further along in the process. So tonight, for the agenda, we're going to go over some of the more frequently asked questions that we receive about the referendum process and the city's infrastructure. We'll then provide an overview of the projects that are included in the referendum. After that, we'll move into a financial discussion with our finance director on why we feel the debt makes sense and review the available funding sources and the current and proposed debt service obligations for the city. And then we'll finish up with Q&A, so please hold your questions to the end. Tonight you'll hear from myself. I'm the acting city manager. Normally I'm the public works director. We also have Dave Del Grande, who's our finance director, Tim Filaski, the acting public works director, and Joe Spadafino, our parks director. So I figured it'd be best to start with the most basic question, and that's why are we doing a referendum at all? The short version is that we have a lot of large projects that need to be completed and not enough cash to pay for them, so we want to use debt. The city charter outlines our power to incur debt and more specifically covers the exact steps that we must follow to do so. Here in Newark, outside of a few very specific items, if we want to borrow money, it's going to require a referendum. It's important to point out that the referendum authorizes the city to borrow the money, but it does not approve the projects directly. So City Council will still have to approve each project and approve the actual loan documents. That means there are still more opportunities to have your voice heard about specific projects, and it means if there's a specific project in the bundle of projects for one question, so you'll see two of the questions have multiple projects. If there's one project in there that you don't necessarily like, you don't have to vote down the whole thing. You can still vote yes or no and talk to your council person and give them feedback on individual lines that you may or may not have problems with. So historically, the city's used debt a handful of times, most recently for the construction of the reservoir and upgrades to our South Wellfield water treatment plant, both in the early 2000s. Otherwise, we paid for all of our capital projects using cash. So what are the questions we'll be voting on? Compared to the last referendum, like I mentioned earlier, the questions this time are being handled somewhat differently. Last referendum, we had one question per project. There were two projects. So outside of Rodney, which does have specific problems, you aren't going to be voting on them individually here. Instead, they're being bundled together based on the funding source as required by our charter. So essentially, we'll have one question. Well, let me go through them one at a time. So questions 1 and 2 are both for the Rodney project. Question 1 covers the purchase of land, the demolition of the existing structures, environmental remediation of the site, construction of the pond, and construction of a multi-use path connecting to the tunnel from Dallam Road. Question 2 includes additional park amenities like walking paths, pavilions, a fishing pier, educational components like an outdoor classroom, and educational playground equipment. Both questions 1 and 2 will be financed through the state revolving loan program, should they be approved, at an interest rate that's been locked in at 2%. Question 3 includes all of our proposed water and sewer utility projects that will also be funded through the state's revolving loan program, but we haven't locked in financing on them yet. The last time I checked on an interest rate through that program, it was around 2 to 3%, so still quite low. Question 4 covers all of our general fund and parking fund projects, and question 4 will likely be funded through a bank loan or traditional bonds. So when you go to vote, each question will have 2 choices. You're either for the question or against, essentially. If you vote for, you agree to authorizing council to borrow money. If you're against, it means you don't want to authorize the borrowing of money for that project. If you step into the voting booth, this will be the ballot. You can see there will be 4 questions on the left side, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then either for or against each individual one. You vote once on each question. All right, so tonight you'll hear Tim, Dave, and I refer to the term capital in reference to spending and budgeting, so I figured it'd be best to start with the definition. So our charter defines capital as any project or equipment, including any extension or addition thereto or thereof, having a life expectancy in excess of or to be financed over a period greater than 6 years or a value exceeding $20,000. That's a mouthful. So what are some examples of capital for us? Bring it home. For us, capital projects are usually things like what we have listed here, and that's infrastructure. The large majority of our capital spending is going to be on an item like this, mainly because these items are very expensive, and like your house or your car, they need to be maintained or replaced periodically. So how much infrastructure do we have? A lot. I'm going to walk through each of our utilities and give a quick overview so you can have an idea of this scale. So we have the most water infrastructure by a large margin, and most of these items are quite expensive. For example, it costs us around $1.2 million to replace 1 mile of small diameter water main, like what's in front of your house. See there, we have 140 miles of water mains. In total, the replacement value of our water infrastructure is estimated to be around $200 million if we had to replace it all today. That's almost $6,000 worth of water infrastructure for every resident of Newark, and that's just for water. We also have a lot of sewer infrastructure. That's sanitary sewer, wastewater. The total replacement value for sewer is less than water because it can be more easily rehabilitated. You don't have to dig up the street most of the time. But even then, it's still estimated to be more than $67 million. Stormwater is even more than sanitary sewer, around $100 million. Stormwater is a little different and unique in that we've got different pipe materials with dramatically different life expectancies. To the point that we're really only concerned about one type at this time, and that's corrugated metal pipe, which we refer to as CMP. CMP usually lasts around 35 to 40 years, and we have about 5 miles of that in the city. This is the pipe that's of most concern to us because almost all of it is approaching or already beyond its expected life. The rest of our pipes, reinforced concrete pipe or high-density polyethylene, the black kind of corrugated plastic pipe, which has a life expectancy of around 100 years on average. In addition to our pipes, we have 65 city-maintained stormwater ponds and facilities, mostly in residential neighborhoods. Our electric infrastructure is made up of substations, lines, transformers, and our McKee's solar facility off Cleveland Avenue. We estimate that the replacement value of the electric utilities infrastructure to be $50 million or more. So in addition to our traditional utilities, we also have parking infrastructure like our downtown parking lots and our metering equipment. Our parking fund in Newark is treated the same as a traditional enterprise utility, with revenues being kept separate from the general fund aside from a margin transfer, which is essentially the city's profit margin on that operation. Lastly, we have our general fund infrastructure, which is city-maintained streets, city hall, police station, our parks and other city-maintained facilities. And this is the infrastructure that's supported by taxes and fees and the margin transfers from our different utilities. In total, we estimate that the current replacement value of all of our infrastructure and capital assets to be around $500 million. That's a huge number considering we're a city of just over 33,000 people. That means we have over $15,000 worth of infrastructure for every resident in the city. The vast majority of it's underground or at least out of sight and out of mind and easy to forget about until you hit a pothole with your car or the lights don't go off or your toilet won't flush. Now, while it's helpful to know how much of everything we have, it's even better to know what condition it's in so we can start to plan. So what's the condition of our infrastructure? I'm going to go through each type in the same order that I just did, and you'll see we have different levels of information on each one. Starting with water, I'm going to focus on mains since they make up the majority of the value of our assets. Getting good condition assessment on water mains is difficult because they're under pressure and need to remain in service during the assessment. We've begun piloting some technologies that will let us indirectly measure the condition without having to actually go inside the pipe. But it's relatively new technology and widespread implementations not occurring yet. In the meantime, we use a combination of our water main break history, water quality complaints, like when you turn on your water and it's red or it stains your clothes or anything like that, pipe age, pipe material, industry guidelines, and we use that information together to estimate the remaining service life and prioritize our replacement efforts. So as I'll show in the next few slides, a lot of our water mains are going to hit or exceed their expected lifespan and expire. That's what we're referring to it as in the near future. It's important to point out that expiring doesn't mean the pipe will stop working all of a sudden and you don't have water. But I'll get into that a little more later. So this is what we like to refer to as the bathtub diagram, and it shows the general failure pattern for pipes. You often get let's see if I can get this done. Yeah, a quick burn-in phase when the new pipe goes in and any manufacturing defects fail early, followed by a long constant rate phase here in the middle, which depending on the pipe, that might be 80, 90 years where you don't really have many breaks whatsoever. And then as the pipe wears out, exceeds its expected life, the break rate increases pretty consistently. So the expected life varies depending on the pipe material, the manufacturing methodology, when it was manufactured, and the longer the life of the material, the longer that constant failure rate phase in the middle. So generally, the older the main, the longer the service life. So that's backwards to how you would think. And that's because back in the turn of the century, end of the 1800s to beginning of the 1900s, they didn't have the manufacturing methodology to create a pipe with a thinner wall with any kind of tolerance. So instead they made them really thick, and we've got some samples in the back of our water main off Main Street that's about an inch thick. It was put in the late 1800s. So water mains that were installed in the middle of the 19th century, so like 1930 through as recently as probably 2015, had a very variable service life. So depending on where they were installed, it could be as low as 55 years or as high as 100 years. And then mains that we've installed since 2016, we've used a different installation methodology, basically wrapping the whole pipe in like a thick plastic bag almost to keep the soil off the pipe. That will increase the pipe life back up above 100 years because a lot of the external corrosion is actually from soil. So this slide gets into what I mentioned earlier about how a pipe expires. So the green line is the cost to operate the pipe. So let's assume there's some chart off here because the cost is pretty low for a long time and we're getting near the wear out phase. So as the pipe gets older, we have more water main breaks, more failures, more interruptions in service. We're patching the road. We've got crews out on overtime like we've had on Main Street the last 2 nights working on an issue there. And all those costs add up over the course of the year. So the pipes get more and more expensive to operate. At a certain point, it gets more expensive to operate the existing pipe than it is to pay debt service on replacing it with a new pipe. So where this point occurs depends on a lot of things. So how hard is it to make a repair on that pipe? Is it out in a field and it's really easy to dig up? Is it under Main Street? Is it under Kirkwood Highway? How deep is it? How big is it? Are there any critical customers that get knocked out if we have a water main failure? So those are all things that we consider when trying to figure out when this point's happening. So right now we're working to develop an accurate estimate of the remaining service life for all of our 140 miles of pipe. That's going to take some time. So for the sake of this presentation, we're going to show you information using recommendations from the American Water Works Association, which is to generally use 70 years as an average for the lifespan of a pipe. We feel that based on the areas of the city where we're experiencing failures, that this is going to be generally accurate for Newark, or at least accurate enough to give you an idea of the average condition. So can we dim the lights up here? All right, so this is a map of our water system with the mains color-coded based off the expected remaining service life. So all the pipes in red, which is basically the downtown, Cleveland Avenue, Main Street, Delaware Avenue, Chapel Street, South College. Those are all beyond their service life. Pipes in orange, which is generally this area. Those are 0 to 5 years remaining. There's some pipes here along Elkton Road that are 5 to 10 years out. And then the big issue that we're facing is in 10 to 15 years when all these kind of light blue areas hit their service life. Now, there are some mains here that are listed as expired, like Main Street, that likely do have some service life left. Like I mentioned, that pipe's super thick. And back in the early 2000s, we went through and did a cement mortar lining on it. And in our records, we don't have any record of having a main break actually on Main Street because it's so thick. Wouldn't believe it, and a pipe from the 1800s. But then we also have some other areas, like out here, where it looks like there's 15 years left, but you'll notice this one we just replaced last year or the year before, and it had had 19 breaks over the last 20 years on a quarter-mile long stretch of road. What's that?
Where is it?
That is Windy Hills. That's Ferncliff Avenue. I can't remember whatever, Ferncliff Road, we'll say. So we replaced that one more recently. So try not to focus on individual streets and instead try and look at the bigger picture. So today we have around 15 miles that are in the expired category. That's 12% of our distribution system. Looking at all the pipes in our distribution system, so that's after the water treatment plant. So we have pipes that are before the water treatment plant as well that aren't in this chart. That number is going to grow to 74 miles over the next 15 years, absent a continued or increased effort to replace water mains. That's 57% of the system. It'll be 59 miles even if we hit our current target of replacing 1 mile every year. That's 42% of the system. And this doesn't count, like I mentioned earlier, there's raw water pipes that carry water from our wells to the treatment plants or from our intake on the white clay to the treatment plant. So based on, so this came out since the first town hall meeting we had. There was a recent study from Utah State University that determined the nationwide average for the percentage of pipes expired is 16%. So we are doing slightly better than the nationwide average. We're at 12. But you can see pretty soon that's going to be considerably different. Nationally, the percentage of expired pipes has doubled since 2012. So in 2012, it was 8%. Now it's up to 16. And the break rate for cast iron pipe, which makes up a large majority, probably half or more of our pipes, has actually increased 46% over that same period. So nationwide, these pipes are starting to fail a lot more frequently. So what does that mean for Newark? Oh, wrong way. Well, we should plan for more water main breaks and interruptions in service. Here we've charted the number of water main breaks going back every year to 1977, which is the first year that we have records. You can see there's a definite trend here in the rate of water main breaks. So each one of these breaks is generally accompanied by a service outage, occasionally a boil water order, depending on how severe it is, and that can last 24 to 48 hours. They have negative impact on the quality of life and, if near a business, on their revenue. Like I said earlier, the pipes don't stop working, they just stop working well. Moving on from water mains, so starting in 2011, the city began increasing our water and sewer rates from the artificially low rate that was in place prior to then. This allowed us to initiate a real capital project initiative where we started ramping up our capital maintenance efforts. While water mains make up the majority of our water infrastructure, our other water facilities have a much shorter service life, so they need to be replaced or rehabilitated more often. So they punch above their weight from a budget perspective. We've been pretty busy over the last 7 years, and we've completed over $17 million in water fund capital projects. We also have 2 treatment plant projects that are currently underway. Actually, one just wrapped up. That was at our South Wellfield water treatment plant where we did a chemical conversion. That's this plant that you're looking at here. And this is what was built during the last referendum. The second project is at our surface water treatment plant on the White Clay Creek to convert from chlorine gas to a bulk liquid system similar to what we have at this treatment plant. We're also planning building envelope and industrial hygiene improvements, so new roof, new siding, that sort of thing. On the sewer side, we've been working to inspect and develop a prioritization for our rehab work. So far on the sewer side, we've inspected 15% of the system with closed circuit television, basically like a remote control car drives up with a camera and inspects the inside of the pipe. So we've inspected about 15% of the system and identified around $4 million of high priority repairs. So we began making many of those repairs already, and we have a project that's currently underway right now. Since 2011, we've spent nearly $4 million on sewer capital projects and have rebuilt all of our sewer pump stations to modern standards. On the stormwater side, we've been focused on corrugated metal pipe, like I mentioned earlier, because it has such a short service life, and it's been failing all over the city. So starting in 2016, we completed a citywide condition assessment of all the known corrugated metal pipe and prioritized repairs. In total, we identified $3.4 million of repairs over that first 5 miles of pipe that we need to complete over the next 10 years. As many of you are likely aware, Council authorized the creation of a stormwater utility, which became effective in January 1st of this year. Because of that, we have a stable funding source that's been designed to provide an adequate amount of money to meet our operating expenses and complete the repairs that have been identified for our corrugated metal pipe over at least the next 5 years. The current rate will not cover the cost of the proposed Rodney project, however, which would increase the median household stormwater bill by around $1 a month. For our road network, we have a full pavement management program where we complete an annual inspection of all our roads, we rate them, and then have those ratings run through an optimization program in an effort to develop an optimal project. So based on the outcome of that optimization program, if we're going to keep our city-maintained roadways at their current citywide average, that doesn't include Main Street because that's a state road, that's not in our system, we need to spend around $1.75 million per year every year. That's just to keep things as they are today. We've only been able to achieve that one time since 2011, but we did come very close in 2017. In addition to that, we also have $1.5 million in parks capital maintenance that's scheduled over the next 5 years. So how did we get into this position? Well, using only cash for our capital projects limits our ability to tackle large projects because they crowd out smaller, less sexy replacement projects and preventative maintenance. It's a lot more exciting to have a new ribbon cutting than replacing an underground pipe that's generally worked well for your entire lifetime. Our water and sewer rates are also entirely consumption-based, so they fluctuate considerably with the weather, which results in a less predictable revenue stream. For example, over the last 3 years, we have underperformed our budgeted water and sewer revenue by $3 million, and that's largely just due to the weather. So in addition to that, nearly 50% of Newark's land area is tax exempt. I don't think that's going to come as a surprise to many people in the room. That puts us in a really deep hole when it comes to paying for our general fund services like police. For example, we bring in around $6 million in tax revenue, and our police cost $14 million. So we're really in a hole when we start out. So we fill that by transferring around 20% of our gross utility revenue over to the general fund from all of our utilities except the stormwater fund. So we think we got that one right when we set it up, and we set it up with a lockbox that money can't be transferred out. This is all money that could have been used for infrastructure maintenance. Now, all that said, in my opinion, the biggest issue that we're facing is that we're entering the first round of the replacement era for our assets. So historically, we've not had to pay for most of the infrastructure that the city owns because it was paid for by developers or the federal government through grants. We're now approaching the first replacement cycle for most of our assets, which should really be thought of as liabilities because we don't have a choice but to replace them. Even the mains that were installed by or for the city directly were originally assessed against all the property owners along the street. Because of this, our tax and rate structure has never had to pay for any of the infrastructure. And our revenue demands are going to increase significantly over the next 20 years as we start to have to replace it. So you can see, developer comes in, they build a new development, they put the water main in, it's built into the purchase price of those houses. But now when it comes time to replace it, it's on the backs of our ratepayers. That are federal government grants, paid for some expansion type projects. Some of our transportation projects are funded with an 80-20, 80 federal, 20% match. And then there are a handful of projects that were city projects, but even those, like I mentioned earlier, were largely assessed against the adjacent properties. So in addition to this, a large majority of Newark's been developed in an unsustainable development pattern, and that's suburban single-family style homes. So if you live in a single-family detached home, I can almost guarantee you're not paying enough to cover the infrastructure necessary to support that house based on our current utility rate structure and tax levels. So for example, if you live in a house with a 100-foot wide lot, your taxes need to support, in addition to our police and other general fund expenses, trash service, for example, the paving and maintenance of at least 50 feet of that frontage, because your lot's 100 feet wide, you have half of it, your neighbor across the street has half of it. So same thing goes for water mains, sewer mains, electric. So using our current cost for water main replacement as an example, 50 feet of water main costs around $11,000 to replace. So assuming 10% of your water bill goes towards infrastructure, which has kind of been our average if you look back over time, it'll take you over 300 years to pay off that section of water main in front of your house that's associated with your house. And that doesn't count any money going towards our water treatment plants, our booster stations, the water tanks, and that sort of thing. Fortunately for us, we have locations like our downtown, like this building here, and our industrial users that are able to offset a lot of the shortcomings of our neighborhoods. Where a house may take 300 years to pay off their section of main, a building like this one, 58 East Main, will do it every 2 to 3 years. We see a very similar pattern for taxes. So here's a map still in development that shows whether a property is paying enough in taxes to pay for the general fund services it gets. While it's not complete yet, the general idea and scope's not likely to be significantly different once it is. So based on our preliminary estimates, all of the parcels in red do not provide enough in tax revenue to cover the cost of providing them with the general fund services. And that's after netting out the utility transfers. So some may come closer than others, but they still don't cover their costs. So parcels that have a positive value are shown in yellow, blue, and green. You'll see mostly they're in the downtown, or they're townhomes or condominiums and things like that. Actually, the condominiums aren't on here yet, but townhomes and industrial properties. What you can see in general is that single-family detached housing is negative, which means if we're to approve a new single-family neighborhood today, it will make us poorer as a community than if we do nothing at all. And that's because we take on more liabilities than revenues. Now, on the other hand, if we develop something that's higher density downtown, say on Main Street, it will help reduce the need for future tax increases because they pay more than their fair share. So one thing I want to point out is if you live in a townhouse or a condominium, I don't want you to stop hanging out with your friends that have single-family homes, or don't take out the boxing gloves. I'm not saying that we need to do anything about this. I'm just trying to make people aware that this is the situation that we're in, and as we move forward and we make development decisions, when plans come through, we need to make them with our eyes open and know what we're getting ourselves into. So I know this presentation's been a lot of doom and gloom, but it's not all bad news, and it definitely isn't unique to Newark. So cities across the nation are looking at the same problem, whether they know it yet or not. Illinois, for example, just determined they need to spend $21 billion per year for infrastructure, when historically they've spent closer to $3 billion. When you consider their entire budget for the whole state is only $38 billion, you can see what kind of lift 21 billion, 18 billion more is going to be for them. Fortunately for us, I think we're in a lot better place than a lot of other cities for several reasons. So firstly, since around 2011, our city council's shown a real desire to tackle the problem, which is reinforced by the fact that we're here tonight to talk about how we're going to get in front of it. And also, we're a relatively compact city. So Dover, for example, has land area that's 2.5 times the size of the city, yet they only have about 10% more people. So you can see they have a lot more stuff to maintain with not many more people than we do. We're also in the fortunate position of having the Star Campus, which will be bringing all new revenue to the city soon. So every private project that's completed at Star, even though the Star Campus is owned by the university, will come onto the tax roll. So Comores gets built, we're going to make property tax off that. In addition to that, when it was Chrysler, that was all Delmarva's electric territory. So we didn't make a penny off the electric sales to Chrysler. As things are built on Star, university or private, doesn't matter, we're going to make electric sales off of them. We'll also get sewer sales back. A large portion of Star Campus is in Suez Water, used to be United Water Delaware's territory, but a portion of it is also city. So this is all going to be revenue that we haven't had for a long time, or we never had before at all. And some of it is going to be pretty considerable. So the electric demand at Star Campus is anticipated to be at full build out about 60% of the demand for the entire city of Newark today. So it's a lot of revenue that will likely be coming from that once it gets built out. And that's all revenue that can be used to either reduce or keep down our electric rates and help offset maybe some of the rate increases that eventually have to happen with our other utilities. So the university, some of you may, I'm glad everybody's seated for this, you may not already know, the university is planning to add 4,000 grad students over the next 5 years and up to 1,500 undergraduates over the next 10 years. Now the graduate students are year-round young professional residents who live and work in Newark. If we can provide them downtown housing at a density that's productive, like we discussed earlier, we can get all the benefits without most of the problems like traffic, public school impacts that generally accompany new development. So every 1% that we add to the tax base is 1% of tax revenue that can go towards the support of infrastructure that didn't have to come from our current residents. So at this time, I'll ask Tim to come up, and he's going to go over all the projects that are included in the referendum. But before he begins, I do want to point out that all of the projects that we're going to discuss were included in the approved 5-year capital budget, which can be found on the city's Budget Central on the city's website at these 2 links. So I know you're probably not going to write them down, but if you go to the city's website, search Budget Central, you can get to all this information. Right. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Tom. Again, my name is Tim Fulaski. I'm the Acting Director of Public Works and Water Resources here at the city. Before I go into the stormwater projects, I just want to make it clear that most of these projects that I'll discuss tonight are ongoing projects or programs which you may have heard Tom or I discuss or bring contracts to council in previous years. Others are simply overdue rehabilitation or upgrades to facilities that provide our water and other services throughout the city. I will give you a high-level overview, but please feel free to reach out to, or talk to me after this presentation, or reach out to me by email. We actually have created a new email address for this purpose, and it is asknewark@newark.de.us. So we're hopeful, and we're actually going to keep that on well after the referendum. We think it's a good. You can basically send any question you have about the city, and it goes directly to our communications team, who will get it to the right person. To get your question answered as quick as possible. So with that said, I'll go into the projects that are up for vote on this referendum. So in order of the questions that Tom had up earlier, so the first project is the Rodney Regional Stormwater Park. So hopefully many of you have heard or seen our proposal for purchasing the former Rodney dorms and demolishing them to make way for a stormwater management pond with park amenities. We have split this into two questions on the referendum, and the two questions will be whether to purchase the property this to us is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the city to acquire a piece of land well situated to help achieve stormwater quality and quantity improvements. The parcel sits at the top of a large drainage area with little to no existing stormwater controls. Managing stormwater near its source is a key benefit to downstream systems. The parcel is also situated in an area that lacks city-owned open space in close proximity to our award-winning Main Street. We took a look at a map of our parks, and we do have a number of parks, but they all seem to skirt Main Street. It makes sense. Main Street is a commercial corridor, so obviously if you own a piece of land on Main Street, you would want to have some sort of benefit from that financially. Unfortunately, that doesn't leave a whole lot of room for parks. So this is an opportunity within close proximity to parks. As you can see from the slide here, that 6,000 residents live within a 15-minute walk of this parcel, and nearly 2/3 of our residents live within a 10-minute bike ride of the site. So those are all certainly important to us. The combination of the pond and the park would address all of these important issues, as well as serve as a showcase for our educational efforts to show residents and visitors how they can contribute to keep our stormwater clean and ultimately our drinking water clean and safe. It's important also to note that the concept plan for the pond and park together presented here is the product of an extensive public process that included input and suggestions from many residents in a year-long effort in 2017. So again, although the project was to develop, the vision was to develop the pond and the park together as complementary to one another, we are able to break out the stormwater management needs from the aesthetically pleasing park amenities into two questions on the referendum. A yes vote on Rodney question 1 will authorize council to borrow money from the state revolving loan fund for the purchase of the property, demolition and environmental remediation, the pond construction, and some minor amenities to allow site accessibility and maintain the current pedestrian pathway, which this is Dallam Road if you're not familiar. This is Forest Lane, South Main Street, and this is the tunnel that exists that leads you there now. So in this configuration, we would leave this trail here so that there is access through the site, which is fairly popular during all months of the year. Minor landscaping and pond edge treatments would also be included. That would be for both aesthetic and safety, as well as mosquito control. You have edge treatments here that native plants, native birds can try to keep any mosquito issues at bay. The estimated cost associated with this question is $6.5 million.
How big is the lake?
So the total parcel is 7.24 acres, roughly. And the pond itself is about 2.5 to 3 acres of that site.
How deep?
It starts out, so it is a wet pond, and so the pond area here varies from about 3 to 4 feet deep for the most part, and then when it rains, additional water goes into the pond, and it would go up to roughly 6 feet.
You don't have concern about mosquitoes?
Like I said, there,
Birds don't eat that many mosquitoes.
well, like I said, there's also circulation pumps and aeration systems that we're anticipating are going to be designed for the pond, so that will keep the water moving, number one, and then obviously the other treatments that we have.
Is there going to be safety netting around it or fencing?
Not at this time. We have data from a lot of places. We actually don't fence any stormwater ponds anymore.
Because there's been incidents of kids falling through cement or through ponds in the wintertime with drowning.
I understand that, but we do have, like I said, we have safety benches, and I can discuss it more afterward. But essentially, this is not just deep here. It would take you about 10 to 20 feet to actually get past, 1 foot of water. So we have taken that into consideration, and I can certainly discuss that with you later. If I could just wait till after, and we can answer whatever questions that you have. Okay. Sorry. So a yes vote on Rodney, question 2, would authorize council to borrow money from the State Revolving Loan Fund to fund a majority of the park amenities that were discussed and chosen as part of the public workshops in the summer of 2017. The residents who participated in this discussion agreed that passive recreation coupled with small classroom space and picnic areas was the best fit for the space. An accessible fishing pier was included, but the pond, we do not anticipate it being stocked. Typically, fish will will show up, but if it becomes a very popular location, maybe in the future we can convince Joe to stock it from the Parks Department. Extensive educational signage and elements will be integrated into the site to show residents and visitors the role that stormwater management plays in our ecosystem and in our city. As Dave Del Grande will discuss later, the funding for the park amenities through the revolving loan fund are locked at 2%, and the approval is awaiting our signature. Funds for these upgrades in future years with other sources of funding will certainly cost more. So this slide lists the project contemplated for our water utility. Several of these projects, as Tom mentioned, are not every 100 years or every 50 years, but every 10 to 20 years, and tend to crowd out smaller jobs or to be pushed out due to lack of available cash. I'll get into the individual projects and a little detail on why each is important in maintaining our water utility. So this is actually a picture of a well in the Laird Tract well field. So the Laird Tract well field restoration is a new project that will effectively double or increase significantly our drought resiliency and bring back some of the production that was furloughed when the reservoir came online. These wells are protected within the White Clay Creek State Park and generally a wooded area, and would be part of a long-term solution to drawing our drinking water from the most protected areas of the city. So essentially these were all raw water lines that pumped water directly into the system prior to the reservoir coming online. These were furloughed in lieu of, in favor of using the reservoir. However, we are exceptionally, we've become aware that we need to have a way to fill the reservoir outside of the creek. Many folks won't know that, or don't know that once the creek drops below a certain level, we can't use the water in the creek anymore in order to let some pass by so the creek stays running. Unlike the Colorado, that doesn't make it to the sea most of the time. We have to let some go by so somebody else can use it. These wells would allow us to actually pump up to the reservoir and continue to use the reservoir for many more days after we typically could. So this is the Water Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition System. So luckily somebody came up with an acronym for that, and it's SCADA. This is an ongoing project which essentially allows us to be in 2 or more places at once. We're able to monitor system data, track real-time levels in production, and make changes remotely if possible. So we have someone on staff 24 hours a day to check, to monitor the water production. Tom and I, be it in our office, at our home, on our cell phone, our smartphones, are able to log in and check the production and help the water plant operator with the production of the water. These I can use this. This actually looks similar to what our system looks like. This is a concrete tank that's up on Paper Mill Road that most folks can't see. It's just before the woods at Levier's. These are the pumps that are outside, and then this is the Levier's tank. So all this works in conjunction to feed water to the downtown pressure zone, which includes all of Main Street and everything north of that. So Tom mentioned earlier, this is a picture of our South Wellfield treatment system. So we are anticipating upgrading this plant. Many of you may be aware that the groundwater underneath of our South Wellfield treatment plant was recently listed on the EPA's National Register, or as many folks know it as the Superfund. That typically is a bad thing, but the good news that can come out of this is that the contaminants found in the water are easily treatable by our current system, and the EPA coming in actually gives us a lot more funding to actually find where the problem is coming from and how to fix it. The most likely fix is to continue to treat the water in the way that we treat it. However, our current system is nearing the end of its useful life and it needs to be replaced. Other modern upgrades are being vetted for inclusion in this facility upgrade as well. We do actually lose about 1 million gallons of production because the amount of contamination is too much for our current system. So we're limited to a certain amount of water that we can treat in that facility each day. So we would gain about 1 million gallons a day of production if we're able to upgrade this system. Tom focused on water main replacement earlier. So as he said, we are in need of a system-wide study, but we do have enough information. These pipes here are actually back here in the back. You can look at them in person. So if you look at this is actually a new pipe, and you can see that it's got a concrete liner. This pipe did not have a concrete liner, and this is the basically build up on the inside of the pipe, and then you can see that the wall thickness here deteriorates over time, and then eventually this would pop through, whether it's from the inside or corrosion from the outside. We do, like I said, we do have enough information to fix the worst of what we know within this 5-year CIP cycle. And as you can see in the slide, replacement requires a large road restoration, which are a large part of the cost. Essentially the old pipe is over here or over here, and then we put this pipe in and then switch everything over and abandon the old pipe and have to put the road all back together. It should be noted that we have better coordination with the annual paving program to try to replace and upgrade utilities prior to paving the street. This reduces costs on both projects. This is actually the Windy Hills Water Tower. This was it prior to a 2015 to 2015 into 2016 rehabilitation, and this is the after. So you can see that we actually left the logo off, but other than that, you can see it turns out, it makes it look a lot nicer, and we do have 5 tanks currently in the city that have lead-based coatings. It's important to point out that the lead is not on the inside, the lead is on the outside. But while the state is beginning to draft legislation on the methods of removal of this lead paint, we are exploring options to remove and replace tanks rather than deal with the dry blasting in proximity to residents in the city. We are working to modify our specifications to reflect the state regulations which will be in place before we begin any of this water tank rehabilitation work. So moving on to sewer, and this is again part of question 3 in the state revolving loan fund contemplation. Essentially, the sanitary sewer is all one project, but it's got many parts. The first step that we do is identify critical lines and perform inspections using closed circuit television or CCTV. The CCTV inspections are then reviewed and the defects in the pipe prioritized in a report, which we utilize to group the projects that are identified for similar rehabilitation methods. If there's a single break in the pipe, we have to dig down and fix that pipe. Otherwise, if it's a general deterioration of the pipe and roots growing through the pipe, we can actually clean that pipe and then put a liner through it that essentially creates a pipe within a pipe, and that extends the life for another 50 to 75 years. And again, we don't have, as I showed in the last slide, of the road being dug up for the water main. Generally, we don't have to do that for sewer mains. If we did, sewer mains are generally much deeper because they run on gravity. I think Tom left it out of this one, but basically the way sewer works, it mostly works on gravity until it gets too deep, and then we put in a pump station to lift it back up until it runs deep again. We do have 3 pump stations here in the city, but in general, we're lucky enough to have some topography and able to run most of our sewer through gravity system. Tom mentioned we've identified roughly $4 million worth of repair after about 15% of the system's been inspected, and we have completed close to $1 million worth of these repairs in the past few years. We will be doing about $300,000 worth of this work coming up here in the summer, and most of that is lining work around the city. Here on this slide, this is for question 4. These are our general fund plans, general fund projects. Many of these projects are necessary for the operation of our city, yet they always seem to get a lower priority than the utilities and other projects. Our ADA transition plan, many of you may notice that the front of City Hall has been modified, the curb line and the handicap ramps there on the front of City Hall. That's all part of this project, and if you see us out and around neighborhoods replacing the curb ramps with the little red domes, they're called truncated domes, on them. That is a federal program that we are required to do every year, or to follow our program each year. We have completed or replaced about 1,400 of these of the 1,800 existing ramps, as well as upgraded many city-owned facilities like the George Wilson Center and here at City Hall. So we do about 40 a year, and we have about 10 years left on our program. But anything with the federal government, I'm assuming that once we get to the end and everything is compliance, they're going to change the rules, and we'll have to start all over again. So we'll see in about 10 years and see how that turns out. The hard surface improvements, as I mentioned earlier, we have an award-winning park system, but they have their own wear and tear. So we do need to upgrade and maintain some of the infrastructure. We'd like to point out that our parks are very well used, and we actually just got some data the other day that shows that the Hall Trail, the Pomeroy Trail, and now the Newark Reservoir Trail are in the top 5, if not the top 3 used trails within the state of Delaware. So they're certainly we get the use out of them, and we need to keep them up to date and keep them functioning. Where possible, we do piggyback these projects along with our annual street contract. So as Tom mentioned, we need to spend about $1.75 million on our street contract, and if that's a sizable project for a contractor. So if we can piggyback $100,000-$200,000 project on there, we get a benefit for both the parks and our street program. So our field operations complex is where we store all of our equipment and material used for maintaining the streets, the water lines, the parks, and the sewers that we've discussed previously. We do lack storage space to keep our expensive equipment out of the weather, and phase 1 of this project allowed us to build a new salt shed, which allowed us to keep a year's worth of salt at our facility and ready at all times. In previous years, we used to have to go to the Port of Wilmington and fight over a barge full of salt with DelDOT and all the rest of the municipalities. So phase 1 of this project so far has been a success. And phase 2 of this project will demolish a warehouse which is already partially collapsed and replace it with a more functional bay system. With that, I will turn this presentation over to Dave Del Grande to discuss why we are looking to finance these projects using debt and the options that we have as a municipality. Any questions you have for me about the projects in general, I can certainly discuss with you afterward, but I'll turn it over to Dave. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dave Del Grande, Finance Director. We're on slide 47, so we're halfway through now. Kidding. Sorry, I've done this 10 times. It's the same dad jokes over and over again. So I got to be consistent. So why debt? The city has historically used cash to fund the majority of our capital needs. Debt financing accomplishes two main goals. One is that it fairly allocates the cost of a project over its useful life, and this allows everyone to pay their fair share of the cost of the project over the period that the asset is in use. The other is that long-term debt has a minimal impact on our annual budget, thereby keeping the city's annual revenue requirements as low as possible. Low needs for revenue trends directly into lower utility and tax rates and fees that the city must charge for the services we provide to you all. So there are three funding options that we consider with these projects. The state revolving loan, which you've heard a little bit about, the bond financing, and then lastly, a standard bank loan. And I'll go into each of those. So the state revolving loans program is the most advantageous method for us to finance water-related projects. Due to the federal support, the state is able to offer low-interest loans on a competitive basis to all government agencies within the state of Delaware. Low interest and closing costs associated with these loans make them very attractive, especially when the rates in the bond market begin to rise. Another advantage of the program is that it provides flexibility with interest-only loans during the construction phase in order to provide budget relief to the agencies benefiting from the program. Our involvement in the state revolving loan program will also make us eligible in the future for grants for our water, sewer, and stormwater projects that we previously didn't have access to. So to make the program advantageous to us, the federal government gives about $40 million to the state of Delaware, which they then turn over to mold into their state revolving program, which then makes these loans affordable for those who compete. So if all of our water-related programs were not approved for a state revolving loan, our fallback plan would be to go to the bond market or with a bank loan. The bond market route is the most costly but provides us a lower interest rate than a traditional bank loan. Even with higher fees, a bond authorization is generally the least expensive once we factor in the interest rates when compared to a bank loan. Bond funding becomes more attractive when we begin borrowing amounts over $10 million, since the fees associated with the bond funding remain relatively fixed regardless of the amount of this being borrowed. The city currently benefits from a bond rating of AA+ from Fitch Ratings and AA2 from Moody's Investor Services, and we would also need to be reaffirmed by these agencies if we were to go to the bond market. Lastly, a bank loan is a viable option to consider. If all of our projects that are water related are approved through the state revolving loan program, that leaves about $3 million left on the block that we'd have to finance. Going to the bond market for $3 million may not be the most cost-effective way with the fees being considered. When we went to the bond market in 2011 to refinance the reservoir, it cost us about $110,000 at that point. So borrowing a little bit more through the bond market is generally a better way to go. Otherwise, we would consider bank loan for $3 million. So our current outstanding loan obligations are around $15 million. The green bar here represents debt service being paid back on the reservoir in the South Wellfield project. $1.3 million of our annual debt service payments through 2022 account for the reservoir. The largest piece of our annual $2.7 million debt service bill represents the automated meter infrastructure project, or the smart meters as you all know them as. The blue bar in this chart represents a payment of $1.1 million annually through 2022 when part of the smart meter debt is paid off, and then it drops down to $753,000 and continues on to 2028. Other items on the bottom that you see in the red consist of parking software and fiber lease for our city assets that we have here. So these are all the projects that Tim had mentioned earlier, and this is basically shows the cash needs that we have going 18 through 22 for these projects. The first one, the Rodney, is approved at $8.1 million, but we have authorization up to $9 million from DENREC. The reason being we were approved at 9 was the state gave us a little contingency amount in case we had some issues, solely because we locked in a special rate of 2% versus 3%. So it benefited us to have that margin there just in case it was needed. Ultimately, it's worth noting for Rodney, DENREC does not generally approve projects like this in advance of referendums or the local municipalities approving them themselves. DENREC kind of stepped out on a limb here, and their committee approved this project and is holding this $9 million for us pending the outcome of the vote on June 19th. So the state saw this project as a very worthwhile one, and it was very committed to the city having a shot at this $9 million. If it were to fail, the referendum, that $9 million would go back to another state agency in Delaware at that rate, and we would lose that 2% option. The rest of these projects that are water and sewer, we have notice of intents in with Newark, and they're awaiting approval at this point. We do not foresee any issues, but things are not always a sure thing. So the remaining $3 million is all listed here, and it shows our cash needs going out for the next 5 years with those. So the proposed referendum helps us allocate the financial obligation across the next 20+ years to share the cost equity and fairly. Our current debt service of $2.7 million would increase to about $3.5 million in 2022, and it drops down as we get into the out years. Any annual debt service amount over the current $2.7 million that we have built into our budget would require us to find the revenue needed to fund this additional payment. The past couple of years, about 90 cents on every capital dollar spent came from cash or current revenue. Our goal is to diversify this spending plan to a combination of cash and debt payments in order to get the projects we need to completed and to spread the cost of these projects out across their useful lives. So the green box that you see up on the screen here is our existing debt. The blue is questions 3 and 4, if we were to stack those on top of our existing debt. And the Rodney question, questions 1 and 2, is stacked on top of those. So ultimately, we have about $3 million in our debt services, equivalent to about 3% of our total revenue that the city brings in on an annual basis. Our goal is, in the long term, is to keep our total debt service payments around the $3 million number. So we're generally staying at about 3% of revenue, which helps us with our planning for the out years. So the gaps that you see below this line here would ultimately be neutral impact on the rates that we have in the city and our tax rates and so forth. It also helps the city management team plan with these projects that we're looking for today and in the future, and helps us allocate these costs fairly across the board so you all here aren't paying for these projects that have useful lives of 20 to 40 years. Ultimately, it's a little rough for us to come up with $27 million in one shot, as you would see here on this chart. So if the question comes around, if the referendum fails, what do we do? Well, the projects still need to happen. We would need to regroup here internally to determine how we would phase them in or do them. But if they were to go as they are, this would be our needs for cash versus using debt. So as you see, going from a spike of $3.5 billion now becomes almost $13 million in 1 year. So in this scenario, we're looking to find almost $27 million in cash in a shortened period. As you can imagine, that would have definitely a direct impact on your wallets. Myself finding $27 million on an $87 million budget that we have already is virtually impossible on my end. So how would this look? Assuming that no other fees were changed, what would our estimated tax and utility rates look like if we continued with the projects? So the top box represents the city paying cash for everything that we mentioned. Due to the cash requirements each year, rates would fluctuate greatly until the projects were completed, as I'd shown you previously, and the large increases would be followed by large reductions in subsequent years, hypothetically speaking, because we're only talking about this core group of a dozen projects or so. So the net overall impact would be about a 12.7% increase on your total bill that you pay the city in 19, another 2% increase in 20, followed by a reduction due to these projects in 21 and 22. And you can see the breakout that we have in an individual. So ultimately, of our average city customer who pays for water, sewer, stormwater, and electric and tax, these are the items that we're discussing. So moving it down to debt financing in the bottom box, you can see it's more of a less subtle of a hit. It's more in line with CPI that goes out from year to year. CPI this past April was 1.4%, and all of these increments are no higher than 1%, which would be next year. And the biggest piece is due mainly to the Rodney Stormwater Project. That 36.9% that you see in 19, that's the equivalent of $1 per month. So in dollars and cents, what are we looking at? The average citizen here spends about $276 per month in their bills that they receive from the city for water, sewer, stormwater, electric, and tax. If we were to go with the cash model, as everything's set today, you would see a monthly increase of $35.19. Then you would see a monthly increase of $6.20 in 20, and then followed by subsequent reductions in 21 of 22 to get you back down to the $276.29 again. Going with residential debt financing, you would see it would be a $2.70 per month increase, which $1, that $2.70 is a stormwater project at the full, with questions 1 and 2 included. 2020 would add another $1. 2021 would be $1.46. 2022, $2.33, and then the $2.33 generally stays out there the same going out until the debt is paid off. So ultimately, the bottom piece allows the residents and the businesses using our assets today to be paying their fair share, and those who will be moving into the city in the future, 2023 and so forth, our grandkids, my grandkids, will be ones paying off the end of the Rodney project. So, accompanied with the state revolving loan program, it also gives us access to a lot of things we didn't have access to before, and that is free money. With the interest that we're paying back to the state, and I've been telling other folks, if this program was a bank, they would have closed 10 years ago, because I don't know how they would have stayed afloat. So, but that's our win. Ultimately, all the interest that we pay back on these low interest loans to begin with go back into kitties that are competed for with other agencies that come back to us as grants. So potentially the interest that we're paying, we could see a majority of that interest payment coming back to us and other grants regarding our water projects. So there's wastewater, surface water, drinking water, planning advances, asset management incentive programs, wastewater facility matching grants, all things that the city needs to do anyway. But due to the fact that we would now be involved in these programs, we have access to more money, which would then keep our future project costs down. There's water improvement grants, drinking water, planning grants, and the list goes on and on. Clean water, all the things that we're required to do, and the state will be helping us with these programs along the way. The best thing near and dear to my heart is the low-income financing assistance program. Ultimately, this program provides up to $200,000 per year, which would be for water and sewer. So the city could be potentially receive $400,000 a year for this program to assist low-income residents who meet the HUD qualifications and to help them with their bills that they have for water and sewer. So something we did not have access to before, but as we move forward with our utility rate reviews in the future, this would help our low-income residents with that new rate structure coming out down the line. So lastly, I will kick it back to Mr. Tom.
All right, thank you, Dave. So what's the process from here? Well, our charter outlines the exact process we have to follow, so we put together this timeline to summarize it. So we started this effort well before April 23rd, but April 23rd was the official start, and that's when we set the public hearing to develop the questions. May 14th, we actually had the public hearing where the questions were fixed by council. We are now in the advertising window as specified by charter, and then the next big date for us is June 19th, the actual referendum date. Following the referendum, assuming that we have a positive result, actually I guess either way, the election results are certified by our Board of Elections, and then they're later certified by council, likely the beginning of July. So assuming a positive result, following July 9th would be when we would start to move forward with our projects. So the project that's closest to starting is the Rodney project, so we would kick off by finalizing our design for that, developing our bid specifications, plans, and getting that project out to bid for consideration by council later this year. The other various projects are all scheduled over the next 5 years to continue. So if the referendum fails, we would need to, as Dave suggested, reconsider the capital budget, reconvene with council to reprioritize and potentially raise additional revenue through our rate and tax increases as necessary as determined by council. So in summary, again, these are the questions. So question 1 is the Rodney facility. So that's purchase, demo, and construction of the pond and the trail to connect Dallin Road to the underpass. Question 2 is the bulk of the park amenities and our educational amenities. Question 3 is our water sewer capital projects. And question 4 are our general fund and parking fund projects. So we're putting all this information on the city's website at the above address, newarkde.gov/vote. We've also set up an email address for questions specific to the referendum and general questions for the city. So this email address, asknewark@newarkde.us, will be in place moving forward. So if you have any question about the city, you can send it to that address and we'll get it to the right person and get you an answer. We've also developed a frequently asked questions document that's on the city's website. So if you leave here tonight and you have a question, you can check there, and there's a good chance someone has asked it during, this is the 10th time we've given this presentation. So at this point, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out again. We'll be and open the floor up to any questions you may have. So I saw some hands pop up, so I'm sure there's some. Yes, sir.
What's your plan B if the referendum fails for the Rodney complex?
Okay, so there's really a plan B and I guess a plan C. So plan B, under our contract with the university, we have an option to buy the land in installments over a 6-year period. So they'd be, we went back and confirmed, $350,000 payments over 6 years would buy us the property. So in our contract with UD, the purchase price of the property is $2.1 million, which compared to what we anticipate Dickinson, once it's formally announced, we anticipate that's sold for north of $8 million. So they gave us a pretty good price on the property itself, so that was nice. But in our contract, it's $2.1 million, and we can deduct up to $700,000 of the demolition costs that aren't covered by brownfield funds.
That's not what I'm asking. You don't buy it, you don't get the money for it.
Okay, so that's plan C. So if we don't buy it at all, the property itself is currently zoned UN, which is university zoning. Right. So for those of you who don't know, university is exempt from zoning. So they have their own zoning classification, and they can essentially do whatever they want. Once they sell it to someone else, it reverts back to an underlying zoning that City Council put in place back in the 70s, which is RM, 16 units per acre, garden apartments. So if it were developed under RM, it could have up to 110 apartment units on that property, is our current estimate. That would require, it would be generally a by right plan, except for, it would have to be approved by council, but the only thing that would be an ask per se is a special use permit, I believe, for apartments, which is it's hard to say no to that unless there's some big issue. So.
Going one step farther still, what is your plan for the stormwater itself if you're not going to put it into this lake?
Yes.
This pond, what are you going to do with it if you cannot have this property?
So we've looked at a few options. So since I don't have a good map, I'll use this as a map for the city. So Rodney is located here. So most of the flooding issues that we see right at the underpass. We have to close South Main Street when it floods. We see some flooding through here in Old Newark in your guys' area, and we see pretty significant flooding over here in Devon and the Bins. So when water flows through Rodney, it flows generally down here through the Star Campus, through Silverbrook, and to the Christina, and then this area connects into that same system. So right now, the easy answer would be, oh, we'll just put in big pipes here and we'll drain this area that floods. But the problem is this area floods too. So if we get the water out of this area faster, it's just going to make the flooding even worse down here. So the only way that we can really address the flooding is either by doing this pond at the Rodney location or looking to do it somewhere else. So if you wanted to do it somewhere else, you're pretty much stuck here or here, realistically here. This is Star Campus. So there is a plan on Star Campus. Part of their master plan is this pipe used to be a stream. They have a plan to daylight the stream and create floodplain storage, that will help. But that assumes that they continue with the same plan that they have today, which may or may not happen. I know that's,
Be a cheaper solution.
well, cheaper for us, but I don't know that they're going to do it. So it's come in and out of their,
Yeah, twist it all arm.
I trust me, we are pushing that too. But it's come in and out of their master plan, depending on who's in charge and whether they want to pay for it or not. Plus, all that floodplain area is area that they can't use for economic development and their efforts there as well. So,
If I could add, Tom, sorry. One thing to keep in mind as well, no one is exempt from paying the stormwater fee.
Yeah.
So with the University of Delaware paying stormwater fees, they're about, what, 40% of the total stormwater bills that we
Yeah.
send out? So they're paying the lion's share of this project as we're moving forward with this. So honestly, it's better for us to control the project and then charge UD as another customer like everyone else in perpetuity, and we get to control what sits there.
I just think that the infrastructure needs here for $15 million is a good idea. But I think a park and a stormwater runoff pond for under $9 million is a pipe dream. I mean, it might be a good idea if we had the money, but in order to keep things go, take care of the infrastructure, forget about the amenities, and look for other options. I mean, why can't we dump it in White Clay Creek?
well, we can't dump into White Clay Creek because it's on the other side of the hill, and that would be a violation of state code. So we can't take water that's going this way and send it that way. The inter watershed transfer, basically, water has to continue going to the same direction it was. So we've done some analysis to see what it would cost to try and get the same benefit through other means. So if we wanted to do it without buying Rodney, let's say we don't buy Rodney, instead we try and buy other property, the cheapest we'd be talking about is probably $10 million to get the land, and then you start to build the pond. If we're in here, it's anywhere from 24 to 32 individual home lots we'd have to buy. Unless we want eminent domain, then nobody wants to do that. So it gets really expensive to address the problem. Yeah.
I think that's, he keeps pointing to my house.
Yeah, no, you're right. That's where you're right over that drainage area. So that concrete swale that runs down the backs of some people's, that's that pipe. So that is actually the top of a box culvert. So all that water from up here flows straight down that pipeline,
So do
basically.
you have an offer for my house tonight? Yeah. I'd like to entertain that.
Yeah. So we'd still need this to get approved to get the money to buy it. So that's part of the issue. But so we've looked at different ways to do it, and this always ends up coming and is cheaper. Plus, in addition to the flooding issue we have a permit from, it's issued by the state, but it's a federal permit through the Clean Water Act. It's called a National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permit, NPDES. And it has a requirement that we not only address the quantity of water that's running off, but also the quality of the water. How clean is it when it leaves the city? So we're responsible for keeping the rainwater that lands on Newark clean. We're also responsible for doing educational outreach to our residents to teach them how to keep their water clean. So having this pond downtown, having partnerships with the university, which is actually a requirement in our contract, opens up a lot of opportunities for us for meeting those permit requirements that aren't there today. In the back, sir.
I have a whole bunch of questions.
Sorry.
What's the catchment area that's going to the Rodney property, and what's the size of the pond?
Okay.
What about Phillips Park, another downstream location for a pond? It's right on the way.
So I can say we have looked at Phillips Park, and the issue we have there is that there's not enough vertical difference. So we figured you could only store about a foot or two of water in Phillips Park. If we went in and excavated it down further, it would just end up with standing water because the outlet is higher. And the distance between the outlet and Dallas, is it Dallas Avenue?
My
Is-
house.
Yeah, it's only about 2 feet, so there's just not enough there to store the same amount of water. So as far as the catchment area.
So the area, the catchment area for Rodney, so if you're looking at, this is the general location, it takes a good portion of the Oaklands. It's about 70 acres, and the total drainage area that this would influence, and obviously the influence diminishes as you go down the watershed, but it includes most of this area and most of Price, where it's about 700 or about 640 acres, so about a square mile, and this is essentially the top 10% of that drainage area. So
Does the Star campus have a water runoff?
So they do. So as they develop, so an oddity of the sediment stormwater regulations from the state is as you develop a property, you basically have to make it a little better than it was before. So you can't make it any worse, you have to make it better. The issue we have with Star Campus is the whole thing was basically paved. So their baseline is paved, the whole site. So anything that they do there is going to make the situation better than it was before, almost anything. And as they're developing, most of their development comes through and they're taking out some pavement and they're putting in grassed area, landscaping, things like that. So as they develop Star Campus and as they remove concrete, they are addressing some of the issues that we're having. But they're not obligated to do any more than is required by state law, which isn't a whole lot there because
to,
of.
to finish up on your question, it's about a 70-acre drainage area, roughly about a 4-acre, 3.5 to 4-acre pond on the 7-acre site, and then again the total drainage area, including the downstream area of the pond, is about 640 acres or a square mile.
So we've got a 4-acre pond to catch runoff from 70 acres, which is 10% impermeable, it's residential.
It's a little more than 10% impervious. It's more dense residential, so it's a little more than 10% impervious.
It's 10% of the drainage area.
Sorry, it's 10% of the total drainage area, so it's the top 10%. It's the top 65 acres of 640.
Right, but coming into the pond,
Mm-hmm.
for an inch of rain coming into the pond, 6 inches?
For an inch of rain, it might be. I don't have the exact calculations, but it could. We're anticipating 3 to 4 feet within the pond for a 100-year event, and that's one that would actually overtop the pond. But in general, we're looking at 2 to 3 feet of water in the pond, so we would end up with much more storage than there's more than an inch of runoff for 1 inch of rain generates a little less than 1 inch of runoff. But if we're designing the pond for about a 4 to 5 inch rain, so you're looking at 3 to 4 inches of runoff over that entire area.
So, aside from the size of the pond, putting a park on Main Street just seems like window dressing. Why not use it for parking and generate income? What I see on this is a lot of routine maintenance in a bond bill, or routine maintenance in a referendum. We're just gonna see, if we have to have a referendum to pay for routine maintenance, we're gonna have these all the time.
So the routine maintenance on this pond would not be covered by the referendum. That would go into the operating budget of the
But
Parks and
the
Rec.
referendum in general,
Yeah.
the water,
Yeah.
sewer, and roads, there's a lot of
Okay, I
maintenance
understand.
Yeah.
in that referendum, which means we're gonna see another referendum.
Yes, so here, can you go to the graph? So the issue we have is we've used cash for so long and we've delayed so many projects that we don't have the cash to do them.
Oh,
Like,
this one.
we have a backlog that we're just not going to be able to pay for, realistically. So the only way that we're going to be able to catch up. So some of the issues that I mentioned earlier relate to the way our rates are structured. So right now, our rates are structured so that if you use 0 gallons of water, you get a bill for $0. And I know you still get a bill. We still have to mail you a bill. That main still sits out in front of your house, whether you need it or not. If you have a fire while you're away on vacation, it's still going to get put out. So there are all these benefits that you get for being on central water that you're contributing $0 for. So what we're going to be working with council over the next, we've been talking about it now for about 1.5 years, is adjusting our rates to put in place a service charge, lower the rate per gallon, so we have a little more sustainability, predictability in our rates. Like I said, we've underperformed over the last 3 years, $3 million in the water and sewer fund, because water sales in town have just been lower than normal. So that's something that we're going to be addressing. We're looking at doing impact fees for new development to come through, capital cost recovery charges for new development. So those are things that we'll be doing as we move forward. And then all the projects that are currently under development on STAR are going to be coming online in the next 5 years. So it's hard to say where we're going to be 5 years from now, but I can say pretty comfortably that because we have this wave of water mains that are coming, I agree. I think 5 years from now, we're going to be talking about doing this again. How much we're doing 5 years from now, I can't say. But I can say that, you know, those big one-off projects are going to be behind us, and it's probably going to be mostly the routine replacement. Now, I don't like doing routine replacement with borrowing either, except the fact that it's just so much of it. It's not, you know, if we were able to replace, let's say a pipe lasts 100 years and we have 100 miles, if we were able to replace just 1 mile a year and just march along, that would be really easy. But it's not distributed evenly. It's distributed in waves following World War I and World War II. The 50s, you know, a mass went in, and that's that wave, that echo that we were seeing coming at us. So since it was put in so unevenly, we're going to have to deal with it as that comes through. So I think in the near term, realistically, 5 years from now, we're going to be layering on some additional amount of debt, and then probably 5 years out from that, maybe we're laying on some more until we get past that wave of water mains, and then we're able to maybe take a break for a little while. But an important thing to think about is, you know, this is what it looks like doing it with cash. 5 years out, it's going to be doing the same thing, because this is just 5 years worth of projects. So 5 years out, we're doing some more, and then 5 years out, we're doing some more. So you know, it may cost less in absolute dollars, but at 2% interest, I mean, that's the Fed's target inflation rate. So it's almost nothing. And then some of these grants that are available. So where is it? This asset management incentive program, they rebate back to us 1/2 of all the interest we pay to pay for an asset management plan to determine exactly what projects we want. So after you take out the half the interest is coming back to us, and you know, we're getting up to $200,000 a year in the water and sewer fund, we might actually get more money back than we're paying in interest. So there are these programs available. The State Revolving Loan Fund program is incredible. Every time I talk to the people on the phone, they bring up something else I didn't know about before. And like Dave said, if it wasn't paid for by the federal government, they'd be insolvent. But basically, the whole program is set up to make it affordable and to make it easy for towns to address issues like this. Yes?
The bulk of the money is for water improvement.
Yes.
I understand our South Wellfield is a Superfund site. The Laird Wellfield was shut off, so the reservoir could be built. Those are big things that are completely understandable. But the park at the Rodney property just seems like a luxury we can't afford. We're funding routine maintenance through debt, and yet we're building this beautiful park. I know some of the people in this room can't afford it. I live in Cherry Hill Manor. I can't afford it.
Yeah, and I think our council members heard that same feedback, and that's why it's now split into 2 questions. So we got the question 1, which is the core project that helps us address the target things that we're trying to address, and then question 2 was the extra, the things that make it a nice park, the educational aspects and things like that. So, you know, if you support addressing the flooding, you can still vote for question 1. If you don't like the park's features, you can not vote for question 2. So,
It sounds like whether the referendum for the Rodney complex passes or not, your plan B is planning to purchase it over a 5-year period of money anyhow.
well, I wasn't saying that was.
What our vote is on the referendum.
So I wasn't saying that was my plan. I was saying that was an option. So our contract has that option available. Ultimately, it's up to council as far as what they do, because the problem.
Would there have to be another referendum in order to?
No, not to do that, because we'd be paying cash at that point, so there's no referendum.
But
But-
it would mean an increase in taxes or whatnot in order to work.
So that's an
But we're
odd
borrowing.
thing about our charter. So our
Yeah.
charter does not require a referendum to raise fees or taxes or anything like that. So council could do that and not have to ask,
We have been doing that.
and that's what we've been doing,
That's why.
but they have to ask to do that. So.
My water rates have gone up, what, 40% in the last 5 years?
Yeah, and the issue that we have, so that's a great example. So
And
since,
what have we got?
so you got $17 million worth of capital projects over the last few years. So the issue that we have, and that's a perfect example. So when I came to the city in 2011, and that was right when they started to ratchet up the water rates. We were basically at a situation where we had no revenue on the water side to do anything. So over the next few years, they increased water rates, and then they've stayed flat for the last couple of years. And during those years where it stayed flat, so like I mentioned, our police service, for example, is $14 million. We only bring in $7 million in taxes. So if the cost of police goes up 2%, our tax base needs to go up 4% to offset that 2% increase. So there's a multiplier on expenses in the general fund. So as healthcare costs have gone up and as personnel costs have gone up, it's exaggerated the impact on our tax base. So all that extra money that's been generated from those water rate increases is gone now, and it's all going back to the general fund to pay for things in the general fund, and that's one of the issues. So we, since 2011, we've reformed our pension program, so we no longer have traditional pensions at the city. So anyone that's hired has a 401k style. We've reformed our retirement health care program, so you don't get retirement health care anymore. You get a health savings account that money goes into, and then it's basically a bucket of money you can use to pay for things. We've changed from a private health care insurer like Blue Cross or Aetna to a publicly held, we're part owner of, it's called Delaware Valley Health Trust. And that saved us, just those 3 changes, $1.3 million a year on this most recent year's budget. So we've been doing a lot with council to try and keep our costs down. And even doing those things, the costs are going up and none of our revenues grow with inflation. So Dave and I were down in Dover earlier today to hear a bill, House Bill 435, which is to allow the city to have the ability to charge a lodging tax. So we're looking for a charter amendment to be able to charge a lodging tax. And if that passes, a lodging tax on hotel rooms. So believe it or not, Newark has 1,000 hotel rooms. So every 1% of a lodging tax is equivalent to a 3 1/3% tax increase. So we're looking at everything we can to try and keep our costs down and diversify our revenue with something that grows with inflation, like the lodging tax. But unfortunately, without annual increases to keep up with inflationary costs and healthcare costs and things like that, since none of our fees or taxes grow with inflation, we basically we raise our rates, and then over the next few years, all that money erodes to inflation.
I have a suggestion, start charging a fee to the university per student that they bring into our town.
So we have discussed that fee, and I believe in order to do that, they would have to agree to it, and they are not going to agree to that. So we broached that topic with them. So that's not going to happen. So they do pay all of our utility rates. And
I understand that, but I mean, most of the police and the cost of the police and everything is because the influx of the population in here when the university is in town.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
We're spending an enormous amount of money to take care of the university
Yeah,
every year, and they're not even a state university, but they hide behind the guise of being a state university with state money. And I think the city council ought to put their money together and put somebody down to lobby the General Assembly down in Dover in order to get the charter changed to turn them into a private institution so they pay their fair share.
they're all good things. I can say I'm meeting with people in the university on Monday to talk about what they pay to us. So they pay us, basically it's called a payment in lieu of taxes. We call it subvention here. So they pay us a certain amount each year to cover some of the fact that they don't pay taxes. It's not much. But they also have their own police force. They provide their own trash service. So they provide themselves a lot of the services that their taxes would pay for.
But we provide the infrastructure.
Correct. And they pay for the infrastructure just like everybody else does through utility rates and fees. So if they came, like when they built the new dorms on Academy Street, it required improvements to our sanitary sewer system. They paid for those improvements. It required paving of Academy Street. They paid.
They're chipping in.
Yeah. No, we hold them to the same standard that we hold everybody else to. So they're required to do.
Also, just
Chris, I saw you. Okay, in the back again. Sorry. So.
Well, first I have to tell you, full disclosure, I'm in the water allocation program in Denver. I have questions about the reservoir field.
Yep.
The iron and salt, hydrogen sulfide will be removed by aeration when you put it in the reservoir, or is there a treatment plant?
So that is still to be determined. So we're looking at different options, but the leading option right now is to pump it up to the reservoir where it will be dumped into the reservoir. So we put in an aeration system in the reservoir 2 years ago now. And our impression is that that aeration system will be sufficient to strip off hydrogen sulfide and oxidize the iron, and then we can filter the iron out, any that's remaining in suspension at our existing water treatment plant. The other option is to go with a traditional treatment plant like what's at South Wellfield for iron and manganese removal.
So, White Creek, 4 million gallons a day, how much is the Laird Wellfield going to be?
1.5 if we got all the wells to run properly.
Isn't some of that water going to be lost because you can't pump out of the bottom of the reservoir during the drought?
So the wells are they're in rock, basically they're rock wells. So there is some interconnection to the surface waters. How much of that interconnection is there, we're not really sure. But the allocation on our layer track wells doesn't have a minimum pass-by requirement, like the 7Q10 requirement in the creek that the surface water has.
When you put it in the reservoir,
Mhm.
because the bottom has to stay full
Mhm.
to keep the liner down.
Yes.
So if you stop, if you can't use White Creek for extended time, water from the wells
It's going to refill the
will be
reservoir.
lost because it has to stay in the bottom of the reservoir.
So the wells, our plan is to pump the wells directly to the reservoir. So right now, the reservoir was not designed, for those of you who don't know, to basically take 90 days. We could have a total drought, can't take water out of the creek, and we can run off the reservoir for 90 days. So the issue we have is that when the reservoir was built, they armored the top third, and they did not armor the bottom 2/3, and that was the crux of the lawsuit. So the soil, there's a plastic liner, and there's soil that sits on the plastic liner. So once the water level gets below the armoring, that soil starts to slide down, and that was the lawsuit. The first contractor said it was unconstructible because they put the soil and it would just slide off. So because only the first third is armored, once we get below that level, it becomes a lot more expensive to use the water that's in the reservoir because we have to protect the lining. So either through soil tackifiers, laying tarps the whole way around the reservoir to protect the side slopes. So by being able to pump those wells up into the reservoir all the time, we'll be able to replenish about 1.5 million gallons per day, and we're taking out 2.5. So it really lengthens the amount of time that we can use water in the reservoir. It has an added benefit. For those of you who paid attention to the news last year, we had a harmful algae bloom in the reservoir, cyanobacteria. So there was a period of time where we could not use the reservoir because it had cyanotoxins in it from this algae bloom that we had to deal with. That happened because the water temperature got very high. So by pumping cold creek water in, or cold groundwater in rather, keeps the water temperature depressed, and it also doesn't increase the pollutant load. So the water in the White Clay Creek has relatively high levels of nitrogen and phosphorus. So we're basically pumping algae food up into the reservoir when we pump up from the creek. So the more that we can take from groundwater and put in there, the less of those nutrients that are there to feed the algae to cause those algae blooms. So that's the plan, is to pump it up. It will lengthen the amount of time that we can run in that top third specifically, but it will considerably lengthen the amount of time before we were to drain it all the way down. So the liner shouldn't lift because it's held down by soil. So when they built it, the soil that they put on held the liner down. So I don't imagine, like a pool, if you drain a liner pool all the way, it'll mess the liner up. That shouldn't happen here because it was built with a liner. It sat with just a liner with no water in it for a long time. But it's more to lengthen the duration that we can use it. Yes?
I have a question for you. Forgive my lack of expertise
It's
in
okay.
water treatment, but why can't the stormwater be pumped back to the reservoir?
So it would cost.
Why do you have to have a pond?
So the issue is when you're dealing with stormwater, we use a unit of measure called cubic feet per second. And we're talking with this hundreds of cubic feet per second. And how many gallons are there in a cubic foot? It's 7 gallons. So 700 gallons per second is like 100 million gallons per day pumping rate. So you would need massive pumps to be able to keep up with that. Yeah, so you would need to have a pond to act as a shock absorber and then have pumps and then build the force main. So water main costs $1.2 million to put in 6-8 inch water main. You'd need to have probably 24, 36 inch water main. So the water main that serves the reservoir now, that goes from the creek to here can handle 17 million gallons a day, and it's 36-inch diameter, so massive pipe. So in order to, if we were to try and pump all this water out, we'd have huge pumping costs, we'd have huge pipelines, and it would probably end up costing a lot more.
Just to validate your question, it's not unheard of.
Yeah, no, it's not. It
Obviously,
happens.
In
Yeah.
New Orleans, they have much bigger issues.
Yeah.
That is how they deal with it. They pump it. But if you've seen the pumps, they're bigger than this building. So
Is there any other methodology you can use, underground storage tanks, or any other way that it can be dealt with?
Yeah, so there are a lot of tools in the toolbox. It just comes down to cost effectiveness. What's the cheapest way to achieve it? And we feel that this is going to be the cheapest
Well,
way.
there's a $64 question. I mean, that's a, I'm a real estate investor in Newark. 7 acres of land, I mean, that's prime real estate.
Yeah.
And you're right, $2 million is a good price. This probably should be about 8 to 10 million bucks for that land.
Yeah.
Is there any way to do both? Is there any way to have a pond and a structure?
So that, I mean, realistically, if the referendum fails, we're going to be going back to the drawing board with the university to try and, see if they'll, now that the referendum had failed, if they would be able to work with us. It's hard to say. Anything that is not allowed under our current contract, so anything that we did would have to be in a subsequent contract that they would have to agree to work
This
with.
is,
So,
you've discussed University of Delaware enrollment's increasing.
mhm.
We need to have that. If we have more dense areas, you're gonna get more revenue.
Yeah.
That's a hell of a piece of land to basically put under the water.
Yeah, so that gets into another conversation about comp plan. Where do we want the students? Do we want the students here, or do we want the students over here and up here and down
Well, it
here?
looks like
Yeah.
they're coming, so.
Yeah, well, yeah, they're,
We have to-
and that's
we
a,
have to go somewhere.
that's a very important point, and that's something I failed to make earlier, is that, the university wants to add all these students. If we don't give them somewhere to live here, they're gonna live out here and drive in, and we'll get all their traffic. We'll still get the problems, because they'll still hang out on the weekends, weeknights, and we won't sell them any electric, we won't sell them any water, we won't sell them any sewer. We won't get any tax revenue off them. We'll just get all the problems with none of the benefits. So, it's easy to knee-jerk react, say, I don't want them here. But, if we're going to be honest about it, the best thing that we can do is get them as close to campus as we can, and let them build dense. And, there's a gentleman that comes to some of our council meetings who made a comment probably a year or two ago that resonates well with me. Some areas are just student areas, like this area. There's just a ton of students there. So let's just pack them in that area and protect these areas. It's a conversation that we've been having. I think it's up at the next, might be planning commission meeting. I think there's a conversation on the next planning commission about specifically that. But that's a discussion that we're having, certainly. Ma'am.
I have a question, and he's touched on it. Before I get to it, I just want to be offended by the fact that you want to pack students someplace and not allow them in our neighborhoods, because they're people too.
Yeah.
And I'm totally offended by all the redlining in the city zoning codes that say students can live here but not someplace else, as if they're something other than people. But that only became my comment because of what you were talking about. My question was really about the revenue that the city is giving up by not allowing that to be, townhouses or apartments. Is there some estimate of how much revenue is being given up?
Yes, and I should say, we're not allowing them to live somewhere else, but, let's put the development where we want them to go, and then that's where they're gonna end up going. So, moving back. Dave did a back of the envelope estimate, and he's, if it were fully developed, it'd probably be about $50,000 a year in tax revenue. The utility sales is harder to predict.
Yeah.
It depends if they're 4-bedroom, 2-bedroom, that sort of thing. But I don't know if you'd done that since yesterday.
No.
We got that question yesterday, and we haven't had a chance to really
Okay.
come up with a
Thank you.
full answer yet, though.
Tom, you said
Yes.
we're not allowing them to live somewhere else. What did you mean by that?
I said we're not allowing them. Sorry,
Not allowing
students. So students. There's the student housing ordinance, which
Actually, you are with the student home ordinance.
Yeah.
There's certain streets, there's a list of streets that students can live on.
well,
and
they can live.
There's a list of streets students can live on and other ones that they can't, so it's
Yeah.
kind of like.
So there's a restriction on the number of unrelated tenants on some streets. It's really getting out of my
Well, there's basically
wheelhouse,
streets they're not allowed to live on. It's basically Jim Crow laws for white people.
Thank you.
again, not my wheelhouse. That's Public Works.
Let's be honest,
Uh,
that's what it is.
But as the conversation I was trying to have is you can put development where you can guide people to where you want them to go. So if there's an area where we want higher density, if we make it easier to develop higher density there, they will develop higher density there. So it's
You just
It's
want them in
conversation.
city limits someplace.
correct.
So
Where-
that they can pay their fair share.
Yeah, where they can ride their bikes or walk to class and not drive in from Glasgow or somewhere else.
And
Right, a good point, it is a good point with, half and half, puts them on that Rodney complex, if you can
But traditionally,
just your
things,
bond and then,
traditionally things, as they don't have, the students don't have enough space to live, in a group, they migrate out into the single-family neighborhoods. And we get a lot of complaints from the single-family neighborhoods, that the students are there, and then over the past few years, it's kind of moved in with a lot of the new apartments, so.
I get a lot of complaints because my neighbors are there, okay? So it doesn't have to be students.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, just because they're a student doesn't mean that they're a bad neighbor.
True, some students desire to have houses, just like some people decide they want to live in a house as opposed to an apartment.
That's all.
That's it.
All fair points.
Preference.
Yes, ma'am.
I manage properties in the county that have stormwater criteria that has to be met.
Yes.
Is the city going to handle that criteria, or is the
For-
county for maintaining the stormwater?
So the city maintains our own. So we have,
You'll have
yeah.
your own rules and regs and-
yep, so we have our own permit. We do all our own inspections. That's all.
But
the
they are
city.
similar to,
Are
we
they
all
similar?
work under the state, Settlement Stormwater Program.
Okay.
So, we're all delegated agencies.
So, but they don't come
Thank
in
you.
and inspect it?
Correct.
No,
No,
we
we
do
do it
our own.
ourselves.
Good.
We have 354 facilities
really?
that we inspect.
Any other questions?
Well, yeah, just to expand on that, I mean, I'm a college landlord, so probably not a good idea to mix water with students and alcohol, that's not the best combination.
Yeah.
But like I said, I think of like a community like Water's Edge.
Mhm.
I don't know if it'd be possible to utilize, but.
Yeah, it's certainly something that we'll keep in our
That's a lot of land
pocket
for
for.
7 acres.
yeah.
You got a lot of land there, you got a big amount of land.
Yeah. So with Dickinson, we've heard from so the university put out an RFP for that. We've heard from one development group that did not get it, and their bid was $8 million. So I know it went for more than that. So they still haven't announced who got it or what they're doing, but so it is land with value, certainly.
So you had no idea what they're going to do there?
I don't. So they haven't announced it yet. Chances are it's going to be student housing. Let's be honest about it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's
What is it, Chris?
I'm not gonna say it publicly.
so apparently the cat's out of the bag. to Some people.
Could you go back to the chart that shows what the finances would be with this project? What's the homeowner gonna spend extra per month
Okay.
on his utilities and property taxes?
This is the one.
$30 per month.
So this is the one you want. So
Okay,
your total bill for an average, if you're average in everything, average water, sewer, electric, et cetera, your total bill to the city is $276.29 today. If we go the debt model, it would go up, assuming we do all the projects, all 4 are approved, and everything comes in exactly on budget for how much we're authorized to borrow, which is more than we're expecting the project's cost. Year 1 would go up $2.70, year 2 $1, $1.46, and
so we're
$2.33.
talking about basically increasing our cost by about 1%. Is that what you're saying?
Less than 1%.
Less than 1%.
Less than 1%. We're getting all this
Yeah.
investment in infrastructure. You guys have been talking about that for years.
Yes, sir.
I'm tired of hearing you guys talk about that.
Yes.
You know?
So 1% in 19,
1%.
0.5%.
Increasing our costs.
Yeah.
Seems pretty simple.
Well, your first table, it's a wash by 2022, right? Am I reading that right?
Correct. And at the end, so if you pay cash, by the end of 2022, you will have paid $27 million in the middle,
Okay.
but you're back to where you were.
So-
Except that in 2023, we're doing this whole thing again.
Starts over again.
And also,
Yeah.
and one thing to add is, it's been my big drum I've been beating, is if we're paying cash for projects that have useful lives of 40 years, I really don't see the fairness in you all having to pay the full bill of that over the next 3 years versus let the folks who are living here in 2023 through 2040 pay their share of the Rodney project and so forth. Otherwise, it's
Yes,
it's
so
coming on
Rodney-
your shoulders.
Yeah, Rodney's being basically built here in these 3 years. So if you lived here for 3 years and you move in 2021, you paid for the whole thing and you didn't get to even step foot on the property. So that's one of the benefits that we see from using debt is the people that come here 10 years from now to go to the university or to work or whatever else, they're going to be the people that are using it, so they should have an opportunity to pitch in.
So since we've been using cash for all these years, which is nothing wrong with that, but ultimately we've been receiving all this infrastructure for free from the federal government, from the developers and so forth. So now that we're getting at the point where all the World War II era developments are now coming to replacement, we're getting into the point where we need to come up with some ways to finance this. So since we really weren't putting away money over the last 50 years for these replacement projects, ultimately the best way to handle these things is through these state programs that provide interest rates lower than the cost of living ultimately over the next 20 years, and then give us more money back through the programs that they have through the interest that we're paying. So really, we'd be losing money by not getting into these programs in the long term. And ultimately, what happens is if we say no to these programs, they're going to go to somebody else in the state of Delaware. I'd much rather see it come to the city of Newark than go to Bethany Beach or Rehoboth or the places down below. And I'd rather see this offset our expenses versus it going somewhere else.
Chris.
So we're done questions, sir.
Got a couple. We have been savings money, we do have some reserves that we could tap.
But not in
possibly tap into.
but not in water and sewer and stormwater, no.
Hang on, yet. And I agree with some of what you're saying. I have a challenge with when I saw $230 or some odd $1,000 for paving the parking lots. When you're saying people should pay what they're using, we should be able to finance that through the parking lot rates. And
Well-
maybe just a small bump in parking lot.
Well, I mean, the thing is,
So to put that into a project list and talk about residents paying interest on something like that, I think is
So,
one of the outliers there that I'm struggling with.
sure.
So what we tried to do with picking the projects we did was, our goal was to try and keep, ignore the orange because that's a different project. So the main goal, that's a standalone that we knew if we approved it, it was going to increase costs. The goal was to try and keep this blue curve as close to this number as possible because, the part that we go above that number, that's what's driving those small increases, the 1%, the 0.5%, and that's absorbing that small amount. And the hope was that we could keep it as level as we could moving out into the future. So the current debt service that we're paying today just becomes kind of the standard debt service that we're paying. It doesn't have to come out of your pocket. Instead, we just reallocate money that we currently have. So when we look at the project mix that was included, this way. So we picked projects that, here, let me have this.
Yeah.
We picked projects that helped us achieve that goal. But, if council so decides, the way we structured this question is the money can be used towards the capital budget. So if instead of, if feedback from residents or feedback from council is, we don't like this project, you can move that money down to the street paving project or reallocate it to a different project. You could take all these smaller ones that you don't necessarily think should be debt financed. You could put them all into road paving. We could finance it over 10 years and accomplish the same goal, fit the same financial model, and address concerns that came up. So basically, we had to take a stab at picking projects that met a financial goal. We picked those projects. We've gotten feedback such as that. And those are things that we can address after the referendum, assuming it passes, to try and move the money around to somewhere that's more agreeable to the residents.
All right. If I could add, all these projects have been in our budgets, or at least attempted to be in our budgets over the past few years. And if they were all aluminum cans, they would be kicked that way as far as we possibly could kick them. And ultimately, our thought was if we didn't get them in here, that they would be kicked again for another year or two. So they all need to happen. It's just a matter of, Thomas said, is how we finally get to the final product. I mean, ultimately, like the one in the middle, the $50,000 one for the rear deck and stairs. We have daylight shining through some parts of this deck and the back dock. I mean, it's, the city has used basically 9 cents on the dollar in debt for debt purposes, and where we have the county and the state are using 75 to 100 cents, 75 cents to a dollar, sorry, to fund their entire capital budgets. I'm not saying we want to do that. I'm not advocating that at all, but I do believe there's a comfort zone somewhere between what we're doing and what the state and the county are doing and our other government agencies. The state's at the point where they're actually at their max limit on an annual basis, and we're definitely not going at that point. But we're at a good stage right now where we can make these decisions and use our community to help us with the input to get us where we want to be. And ultimately, these items on this list, a lot of them are public facing. There are parks, and they're the things that our families here use and so forth. And we just want to make sure that they get their just due, because like Tom said, there's not a whole lot of glamour in the sewer and water infrastructure that are under our feet. It's the parks and those types of things that our public tends to have more awareness of, and we can all get those things straightened out with this referendum. And one last thing, if I could add, the referendum in the minds of the city of Newark, at least on how it works for the city versus what most people generally think of with a school district. When you hear the word referendum in school district, you automatically think, oh, my taxes are going up, because they are with the school district. They're borrowing more money so they can do more things or pay expenses that they didn't have in their budget. But the reason it's happening is they're adding to their budget. Here, we're just using another source of funding with this referendum. We're just asking the public to give us, our council, the authority to borrow up to $26.7 million. And by working this into our current debt structure that we have, and based on the cash when we need it, we're not borrowing it all on July 1, 2018. It's over the next 3 or 4 years. We're working those cash needs into our 5-year plan. So it falls into our current debt payment structure that we have going on. So we can build that into our budget. So we're not passing on those huge expenses of cash financing only to the public. You're seeing small increases, like you said, sir, of 1%. So a referendum is actually doing the opposite here for the city versus what you're seeing in school districts. It's actually keeping the costs down on the immediate term and spreading those costs out over the life of the assets. Sorry, sir, I took your question a little further.
All right.
No, that's good.
Yeah, why don't we wrap it up for now? Tim, Dave, and I, and Joe will be here if you have any questions that you didn't want to ask from the group.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.